Welcome back, traveller. You're just in time. I was just about to tell one of the oldest stories that I know. Handed down from the Tuatha themselves, the old gods of Ireland who walked the land long before we ever saw the Green Isles. This is a story about the Dagda, the good god, chieftain of the Tuatha, lord of plenty, wisdom, and power. His story stretches back more than 4,000 years, back to his battles with the Fomorians, handed down through generations, including some stories through my family. So pull up a chair and fill your mug. Let's talk about the old texts that mention the Dagda and some of the old traditions we preserved here in the tavern. The Dagda, also known as Eoke Dolothair, or the Father of Fathers, was no ordinary deity. He was the chieftain of the Tuatha, the tribe of Danu, and he ruled with wisdom, power, and more than a little bit of humour of his own sort. Now you might have heard some stories about him calling him an adulterous, bumbling, drunken fool who can't keep his head on straight. But those are the bastardizations of the story from over time, later versions that distorted his legend. But that is not the true Dagda. He was a warrior, a druid, and a protector of the land. Sure, he loved his food and drink, but who among us doesn't? But his heart was on the peoples of his family and on the peoples of Ireland. The Dagda's origin is tied to the very earth itself. He was born of Danu, who is recognized widely as an earth goddess, and he became one of the great leaders of the Tuatha. They were the supernatural race that ruled over Ireland before mankind took over. And in great battles with the original occupants of the Isle, the Fomorians, who are widely described as a race of giants and or demons, the Dagda played a very crucial role in these conflicts as well. There are even some contrasting tales between Lu and the Dagda. There are some who call the Dagda born of the sun. However, we know that Lu is born of the sun and he is the god of sunlight and the sun itself. I've even heard tales that say the Dagda bestowed the title and responsibilities of god of the sun upon Lu at some point during his reign as their chieftain. And the Dagda's strength was certainly flashy. There are tales that say that the very earth responded to his touch, and that the valleys fawned by his feet, and the winds blew with his breath. Now let's talk about the many magical tools that the Dagda used, probably most iconic of which was his magical harp, called the Winya. And it is said that this harp could control the very seasons themselves. One strum could bring forth summer, another strum could bring about the spring, and another could bring about the cold of winter. It was said that when the Dagda played his harp, he didn't create music, he shaped the world. There's actually a spectacular story about when the Dagda's harp was stolen. In some versions it was the Fomorians that who stole it, and some it was bandits. But when the Dagda showed up, he snapped his fingers or he whistled for his harp and it leapt right to him. And in my favourite version of the story, the harp actually kills all of the bandits before returning to the Dagda. And in the version with the Fomorians, Uinyo returns to the Dagda's hands. With one strum, all of the warriors of the Fomorians freeze on the battlefield. Just long enough for the Tuatha to regain the advantage, reorganize, and win the battle. And that was one of the great strengths of the Dagda, not just physical power, but in the influence and control of the very elements. And then of course there is Logmore, his great staff or club. And it wasn't just any old staff. They said with a single swing of this club, he he could kill 9 men. Now, given that he was a giant, supposedly many feet tall, 20, 30, some stories even say he was as much as 100 feet tall, a single swing of a club is not insane to believe it could kill 9 men. But what was incredible about it is that if he took the other end of the staff and he touched the body of someone who had died that day, before the sun had set on the day that they died, their soul would return to their body and they would raise back to life, perfectly healthy, full of vitality, literally taking life with one end of his staff and giving it with the other, holding the power of life and death in his very hand. Can you imagine the marvel of that? In one of the stories that mentions Logmor, I believe that Kermat, who was the Dagda's son, had died and he used the end of his staff to bring his son back. And it is a rare moment of vulnerability for these ancient immortals. And it also shows us that the Dagda, who's widely portrayed as a reckless drunkard, he actually had as much of a healing side to him as he did a side of destruction and war and battle. And let's not forget his cauldron of plenty, the cauldron that would never run dry, one of the great treasures of the Tuatha De Danann. No matter how many people came to a feast, it would never dry. There was always enough drink for everyone. And it's actually believed that this cauldron and the cauldron that was held by Agar in Norse mythology might actually be the same artifact. But that's a story for another time. Because I would like very much to talk about the Dagda's pigs. Yes, he had 2 incredibly fascinating pigs. And to be fair, they were magical pigs, very similar actually to Thor's goats. One was ever growing, and one was ever roasting. Talk about never actually going hungry. It was said that his feasts were so incredible that people would travel for miles around just to get a taste. And that's the essence of most of the stories about the Dagda. It is generous to a fault and always a trick or two up his sleeve. Now here's something from my clan. I've talked before about a dance called beast stomps. These were fierce dances that have been handed down from generation to generation that were meant to evoke the spirit of mythical or even powerful beasts, to draw on the power of legends. Now, usually they're just performed ceremonially at festivals or dances, things like that, but it is believed and told that they used to be used as an intimidation tactic. Men wearing horrifying masks with blue face paint, their bodies painted blue, to frighten those who they challenged. But it was also believed that those very dances could draw on the power of the beasts and give courage and fortitude to anyone getting ready to go into battle. That's not a unique story. We see this in warrior cultures all over the world. Probably one of the most beautiful stories about the Dagda, and one of my favorites, is a walk that he took that shaped the very world that we live in. One day the Dagda tired of where he sat, so he got up, he took his harp, and he walked, and he walked, and he walked, and he played, and he played. And his feet, they carved out great valleys and rivers as they drug and stomped. And his beard hairs fell as he walked, and they formed the great forests of the world. But something else happened. As he played, he walked through the great snows of the north, through the rains of the jungles, through the heats of the desert. And as he walked, they followed him. The snows and the rains and the heat, they followed him. And after he returned to Ireland, he laid down and he slept for 13 months. It's important to remember the Celtic calendar was only 13 months. I don't know why I said only. That's more than what we have in the Gregorian calendar. There were 13 months in the Celtic calendar. And when he awoke, he was covered with a white blanket of snow. He had inadvertently created the seasons. But there was some truth to the Dagda not liking responsibility, because eventually he would pass off that procession to others in the Tuatha De Danann. He would hand the procession of the spring over to his daughter Brid or Brigid, the goddess of healing and poetry and prosperity. And in our stories, the winter procession was guarded over by Vera Calach, some might know as the Winter Hag of Ireland. And because of some foolish mortals who robbed her of her youth, that is why the winters in Ireland are so very harsh, because she now rules over those months with an iron grip on the cold. And there you have it, my friends, the essential tale of the Dagda, the good god and the father of the Tuatha, a symbol of strength and generosity and wisdom. His legacy lives on in the land and in the stories and in the traditions that you and I pass on together. So if you'd like to hear more stories, you can always come back and you'll find me right here, Castle, in the Black Dragon Tavern. So until then, my friends, stay bloodthirsty, and I will see you next time.